I'm Stephan Tual, I'm the CCO for Ethereum, and I'm responsible for a little London hub. My background is actually in machine learning and customer targeting for subsidiaries of Visa and BNP Paribas, and now I've joined the dark side of decentralization since January, actually. Before we get into what Ethereum is and how it works, I think it's important to understand why we even need it. So if you think of a good example is to start with something like Facebook, for example. You go on Facebook today, and it's actually connecting, your computer is connecting to a remote server where you ask for permission to know what's going on with your friends, not Facebook's friends, yours. You ask permission, so you log on, and they let you see your friends. And every time you take an action on the Facebook network, you request permission. Transparent perhaps, but you still request that permission for every action you take. You don't know where that server is, you don't really know who controls it, you don't know where it's geographically located, and you don't know what they're doing with your data. In fact, Facebook was actually recently conducting an experiment to play and alter people's mood by showing them different timelines. I find that a little bit worrying, and that's in my view, stems from the fact that those centralized models are broken, pretty much. They allow people an uncanny amount of power over people's data and personal lives. And that applies to just about anything else. So Dropbox, for example, who here uses Dropbox? Right, so if Dropbox gets hacked, all your files are gone, right? Somebody will have access to. So you trust Dropbox and Dropbox staff to all be top-notch engineers, top-notch individuals who wake up on the side of the bed every morning, and you trust them. Basically, you put your trust in Dropbox. And you might not think too much about it, you might click quickly through those terms and conditions, but you still do. And you do the same for any other web service today, and in fact even for non-web service, like your bank. You trust them with your money. You trust that they're going to be honest. There was, in Belgium about 3 months ago, an example where the government had issued a retroactive law which involved tax. And banks simply helped themselves from customer bank accounts that were impacted by this law. So they literally took the money after the fact. Cyprus, let's not even go there. So, basically you're looking at centralized models that require trust. But it applies to all sorts of other things. So if you're an application developer, you try to go on the App Store to submit your new game or your new app, you have to ask permission to Apple, and on top of that you have to pay them. And then if a year later they change their policies, they can take you out anytime. They take your app completely off the store. Actually has an extension store which also works the same way. People get pulled out of there on a fully regular basis. Imagine being the developer who has a community of users that depend on this app to run their daily businesses or just to entertain themselves, but they use it regularly. All of a sudden that extension disappears. Do people blame Chrome or Google? No, they blame the application developers. They say, why did you take the application out? They go like, I didn't. It was pulled. But for what? The other thing that's a little bit worrying, and I'm well placed to know about this, is that in terms of the loss of privacy and what companies do with your data when they have access to it. So the current monetization model for web or for most apps, matter of fact, including loyalty cards and things like that, is to simply provide services for free, but you as a consumer become the product. So Facebook is a good example where they'll track your patterns, and that data is then sold to advertisers so they can target you better, and it works. We used to work in the field, especially in the loyalty card space. This stuff works. It's pretty much people pay 1% of their annual revenue, and they get 5% incremental points in their revenue, in their profit margins. Oh yeah, I'm not here to ask you for money. We raised about $18 million in a sort of crowdfunding exercise, which was an Ether pre-sale. I'll get to how that took place as well during the Q&A. We're a not-for-profit organization. We're basically a Stiftung based out of Switzerland, and we have various subsidiaries, entities that are also not-for-profit organizations. So our goal is really purely to build a protocol, and then we'll see what happens to the foundation in a couple of years. Exhausted those funds we had access to. And the reason for that actually is because a protocol historically has never succeeded when it was licensed. So if you remember Token Ring, anybody remembers Token Ring? Yes, a few people. So token ring was interesting because it was a technology that was in many respects superior technologically to Ethernet, but nobody really remembers token ring except 3 or 4 individuals here today. So token ring was a networking protocol, if you will, similar to Ethernet, and in many respects far superior to Ethernet in terms of speed and so on, and the way it was functioning internally. But nobody remembers it because it was licensed heavily. The OEMs were licensed probably 3-4 times what you would expect to pay for an Ethernet card. And so now we have Ethernet. So I really believe in protocols being completely free and open source. Apart from that, I don't think that would, in this particular model, especially when we talk about privacy, when we talk about openness and decentralization, everything needs to be completely free and totally open source. In terms of how you build stuff on Ethereum, it's actually using web technologies. So if you're a web developer and you're familiar with HTML and JavaScript, that's how you would build the front ends. And that's a very important point because Ethereum's goal is really to trivialize the creation of technology that's been historically hard to build on. I remember last year those concepts of DAOs, which I'll get into, and building on blockchain were fairly popular, but also very, very hard to get into if you're not an advanced C++ programmer or an advanced cryptographer. And so what we want to do is we want to really make it simple, and web technologies is the perfect gateway, so to speak, for implementing decentralized applications. In terms of the languages that you can use the framework. So the decentralized app have access to the network on the front-end side of things. So you can use any framework that you're familiar with, whether it's, say, Twitter Bootstrap or Angular from Google and that kind of stuff. So you're not limited as to what you can do. And we also support, and that's not on this slide, QML for embedded devices. So things like in your car and stuff like that tend to rely on this thing called QML. So we support both HTML and QML, technology agnostic. In terms of the backend, we have a multitude, 4 technically, of high-level languages to build those backend for those decentralized applications. What we're able to do is have this intermediate bytecode layer, a bit like Java when you compile down into intermediate bytecode and run that on the virtual machine. So that's sort of like the base layer at the very bottom, and then easier to pick up high-level programming languages that look like but aren't, Python, Lisp, C++, and Go. And they have different names. For example, the Python version, we called it Serpent, and the Go version is called Newton, and things like that. Because I'll get to why that is, but we had to restrict some of the functionality from those high-level languages. But for a developer, who is, for example, a web developer, a Ruby on Rails developer, it's pretty straightforward to pick up. Anybody can get started quickly. So this blockchain technology, which is represented here with these little blocks, I think it's worth getting into because that's really how the magic happens. So how do we assure that the information that comes out of the network is correct and nobody's cheating? So the blockchain, you can think of it as a decentralized database, a database where everybody got a copy of the information at any given time, and they receive the new transactions that people are making and the products of the calculations of the programs that are running on the Ethereum chain at all times. And every 10 seconds in the case, they come into consensus as to what the truth is. And in order to do that, for example, we could take a simple example of somebody saying, well, I have say 10 pounds, right, in my account, and everybody can go and check that this is true. So if I was to lie, and I said, oh, I have 100 pounds in my account, but you can look at their copy of the blockchain and say, that's not true, you only have 10. And so that's how you prevent people cheating, so to speak. The whole network comes into consensus every 10 seconds. So that has interesting different properties versus, say, a large-scale database. A large-scale database used to things that are almost instantaneous. And on Bitcoin, it takes 10 minutes. So we've improved on that technology, but the concepts are fairly similar. Another big difference with Bitcoins for the Bitcoiners in the room is that we're not what's called UTXO based. So we're not trying to do like Bitcoin, constantly tracing transactions since their origin in order to know what the actual results are. We're accounts based, so we have a lot of room for things like super light client, mobile phone applications out of the box, and so on and so forth. And we also have those contracts, those little programs that form sort of the smarts of Ethereum, so to speak. They are first-class actor. They're literally completely autonomous. and that's what the slide is. So contracts are little computer programs written in those languages I mentioned earlier that compile down into this intermediary programming language called EVM code. And they're completely autonomous if you program them to be as such. So if you decide I'll add some administration feature to my contract, to my little Ethereum program, you can. But if you don't, the contract will continue existing on the Ethereum blockchain ad infinitum as long as it makes money, basically, as long as it fulfills a purpose on the network. Blockchain technology is, the difference between blockchain technology that's used in Ethereum and centralized systems is that in centralized system, to recap a bit what we were talking about earlier, is that centralized system requires to put your trust into the security teams of the service that you use, whereas on the blockchain, this trust is achieved on an open network, so to speak. So you could argue that in a sense it's trustless. You don't need to put your trust into a centralized service because there is implied trust with the underlying network that supports this decentralized application. Does that make sense for everyone? So again, contracts, those little Ethereum programs, live on this Ethereum blockchain and can be completely autonomous from any human interaction. I mean, they don't have to be maintained by humans, they don't need to be upgraded by humans, they can just keep on running as long as they fulfill a purpose on the said network. So obviously one major advantage of this type of system is that you're looking at applications that don't require any infrastructure. So if you remember when you were trying to build maybe back in the days a gambling site on the internet, or before, if you wanted to build a gambling something before the internet, you have to have a casino, a license, you had to have a brick and mortar location and so on. Then the internet came up, so now you can just create a website, but you kind of need a payment mechanism that'll support it. So you have options like PayPal and so on, but it's not that great. So now you have Bitcoin, so we're seeing this evolution where it's even easier. You don't even need to pay the payment provider, you can just accept Bitcoins directly and not having to pay commission. But you still need the web server, but with Ethereum, now you don't even need the web servers. So it's completely zero infrastructure. In terms of use cases, well, pretty much anything. It's a programming language. Asking what can I build on Ethereum is like asking what can I build with Java. It completely depends what you want to build. But there are some particularly good use of a technology like Ethereum. So every application where you feel like you're putting a little bit too much trust into, that's a good candidate in my view for decentralization. So smart contracts, that's a concept that was introduced in the 90s by a chap called Nick Szabo, where you could have automated contracts between individuals without having to rely on a third party. So any type of contract, you know, I'll do this if you do that, that's a perfect candidate for an Ethereum app. A set permission shareholders agreement. Those contracts can be as complex or as simple as you want them to be. So if they're quite complex, they can represent entire organizations. Who has voting rights? Who owns the shares of this organization? How often are the dividends of the company going back to the shareholders? Under what terms? What happens if one of the shareholders disappears or dies? You know, that can all be programmed into the contract. A lot of people have said, you know, code is low, and there were many initiatives since the 70s as to transform legal contracts into programs, but it never really picked up because they're not very different from the written paper contracts that you have today, because you still rely on having a lawyer and then this interpretation of the law or separate jurisdiction. With this technology, you have one jurisdiction. It's the jurisdiction of the Ethereum blockchain, and all the agreements are completely peer-to-peer without an intermediary in the middle to take a commission or mess around with the agreement at a later date. It's a great environment to build prediction markets as well, prediction systems. Oops, sorry, went too far here. Okay. Domain registries, that's a perfect example. You know, today with we rely heavily on the DNS system, and companies like ICANN, we put our trust into them. But as you probably know, if a website does something that the US government doesn't really like, even if they're from a separate country than the United States, if they have a .com, they can be taken out. it's just a matter of the US government to go and make a request to ICANN and take that site out. So a domain registry would be an ideal example. Imagine also all the times where, for example, WikiLeaks, their accounts were shut down, probably illegally, although it's a little bit unclear. They're doing something some governments don't appreciate. A few phone calls are made, PayPal takes them out, their banks takes them out. Thankfully there's Bitcoin, but imagine expanding this benefits of decentralization from currency to just about anything that can be mathematically represented. That's what we're trying to achieve at Ethereum. Peer-to-peer finance, so any type of crowdfunding site, I'll get to that as well. Any type of derivative, because it's code, so you can program any, say shorts or hedging, any types.
So maybe this can save till later. So at one level I get it, but actually what I can't do is save a shareholder agreement. How does that translate into everyday use? How would an ordinary person use it? What are the use cases? I feel I need some kind of elaboration to understand it better.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. We're fine. Insurance as well. Escrows, having multi-currency wallets, for example, where the currency is fully under your control. Smart property, I'll have an example in a second. Savings account, wills. I mean, more and more you have people using those cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin. I certainly do. In fact, most of my assets are in Bitcoin at this point. What happens if I die? With Bitcoin at the moment, I probably have to go see a lawyer and say, well, if I die, make sure that this document, which holds my private key, goes to my kids, and explain to them what to do with it, which is not really convenient, is it? And I'm not sure if it's going to happen or not. With Ethereum, I can program this stuff. I can say, well, if I haven't made myself known on the network for more than, say, 3 months, then I'm probably dead. And at that point, send all my assets to those two accounts. And I know it will happen, and I know it'll be done in the right way because it's code. It can't be changed. It can't be messed around. It's clear. There's no room for vagueness. So let's use some practical example. There's a gentleman here. He has a door behind him, I'm not sure you can see, and he has a Raspberry Pi in front of him. The Raspberry Pi is running Ethereum. The door is talking to the Raspberry Pi. So this door is now part of the network, so to speak, this global network on the Ethereum blockchain. Why is that useful? Well, Airbnb today takes about 10 to 20% commission out of every room that you book. What if that commission was zero? That's a much better proposal to me, I reckon. And this actually it brings an even bigger advantage, which is you don't need to exchange keys anymore. That door is an electronic door. You swipe your phone in front of it, the door opens. So you no longer need to go and exchange keys on Airbnb before you enter the property. So less commission, more convenient, and done in a completely digital way. That also means that on a peer-to-peer system, since commissions are kind of like a bad word, you have to bring real value, and you probably want to pass cost of operation, if there are any, onto your suppliers rather than onto the users. A simple example of that is what people do with vouchers today. If you buy a voucher in Bitcoins on pop.io, for example, you don't pay commission. It's the retailer that enjoys the extra revenue that takes that hit, so to speak, of say 1 or 2% to pay the people who provide the voucher. So you kind of need to think a little bit differently in terms of the type of economy you could build there, because you certainly are not going to be able to go and say, we'll just get eyeballs and we'll figure out the rest later. It no longer works. And that's a good thing. So in terms of practical projects, so the airlock.me, these guys started off trying to decentralize Airbnb, but now they've applied their model of decentralized locking mechanism to just about anything, including cars and lockers and stuff like that. Moneygraph, which is a decentralized art marketplace, so you're sure that the art was actually being transferred to you, that it's under your control, under your possession, and nobody else can take it. Project Eris, which is a decentralized transparent governance project. Create a company on the Ethereum blockchain, assign shareholders, decides who owns what, who can do what, who has what power, and make everything transparent on the blockchain so everybody can go and check that what you said you'd do, you actually have done. And I think that's an interesting one, and how we're going to think about employment in the future. Today, if you try to go get a job somewhere, you probably don't ask the hard question. Who's really in charge here? Who owns this company? How much money are you making every year? If you start asking that sort of questions at interviews, you're probably not going to get the job, because you'll be the guy who asks too many questions. And yet, I think you should be entitled to that information. So having transparent governance for entire organizations, especially employers, on the blockchain, the Ethereum chain, is going to be revolutionary in itself. There's also Foodway, which is a startup that's trying to keep track of food supplies in the Middle East at the moment. So what happened to the food? Where did it come from? Has somebody messed with that food supply? Is what I'm eating really what I was expecting to eat? Is its provenance really what I thought it would be? And that's an interesting project. And CubeSpawn, which is a industrial manufacturing project where you have those little cubes that can create other cubes and replicate themselves. If one of them fails because, I don't know, it's broken or something bad happened to the cube, the other cubes can create another cube that looks exactly like that one that just broke and replace it. So it's basically self-replicating machines that are completely decentralized without any central operator. Yes, it's like Skynet. Another example is this idea of the Internet of Things and how the Internet of Things could benefit from that. There's a very good white paper from IBM, which is on their website. It's called Project Adept. Project Adept is a fork of Ethereum by IBM. They took our code base, and that's okay because we're free and open source, so they have the right to do that. And they went and tried to shoehorn Ethereum in various little devices, microcontrollers, Beagle boards, Raspberry Pi, stuff like that. And they're going to have a demonstration of how blockchain technology using Ethereum can impact the Internet of Things, and they call it rebooting the Internet of Things, so making sure the Internet of Things actually do happen. In the CES in Las Vegas in January. So we're really looking forward to that. So it's a really good validation of what we're trying to achieve, and this is obviously a well-established company that understands the benefits of decentralization to not only consumers but also manufacturers and consulting companies and so on. Another thing you can do when you have access to a ledger, a decentralized ledger that you don't even need to trust into, is assign shares to things. So you could say 3 tokens, if I'm going to create 3 tokens, represent 3 shares, for example. That's quite important because when you buy something on Kickstarter today, all you get is a pre-ordered product or a t-shirt. I bought an Oculus Rift about a year ago, I think. Paid about 400 quid for it. 2 weeks later, they were sold to Facebook for $2 billion. And I just sat there with my antiquated Oculus Rift, because they also, by the way, released a new one. I mean, with all that money, then they had that R&D budgets, right? And they actually released 2 more models after that. And I got nothing really in exchange. I got this old model, so now I have to sell it, but nobody wants to buy it because there's a new one. And that's kind of like a broken model, isn't it? We should be able to have shares in those companies when we support their business by sending them funds in a crowdfunding effort. So that would be a perfect way to leverage Ethereum. You issue shares in exchange of, say, bitcoins or fiat money, and you reward your users if your business is successful. And if your business fails, then that's the risk, so to speak. Anybody can become a VC, which I quite like, anywhere in the world. The other thing you can do is, if you can issue tokens of value to just about anyone, is that you can incentivize stuff that's been notoriously hard to incentivize. So mesh networking, for example, everybody talks about wireless mesh networking. There's projects that are technically very valid, but it never really picks up because nobody can be bothered sharing their Wi-Fi router with the rest of the world. What if when you share your router, for every megabyte that you've given away to the community, you get a few tokens that you can then exchange on a decentralized marketplace for just about anything, either other tokens or money or services, anything really. What if you could also get tokens for distributed grid computing projects like BOINC? If you're familiar with BOINC, I think it's a Stanford project. It's basically a system where you give away some of your CPU, your spare CPU, and you crunch data packets that a university or a project or something of the sort has sent you, and some of these projects are quite fun. So there's one which is getting the data from the Arecibo telescope and trying to find little aliens in the signal. Others are more serious, like Folding at Home is folding protein in order to try to cure certain types of cancer. But right now, when you do this stuff, you kind of like donating, you don't really get anything in exchange. How cool would it be if people were rewarded for that stuff? Measurement of clean energy production. We've been ourselves contacted by several energy companies that are trying to become more operators than producers of energy. That's a big thing right now, decentralization of energy, especially in Germany. What if you could get rewarded for producing say, energy at home, sending it back to the grid with those tokens of value? And they find that quite interesting. And also any rewarding people for actions in the physical world, like I don't know, a Facebook check-in or a Foursquare check-in, that kind of stuff. Another example is this idea of bringing reputation back into finance. So you got this decentralized network that always tells the truth. It's a perfect place to calculate reputation. So I bought stuff on eBay, I was a great customer, my reputation goes up. But because it's decentralized, now I can have that reputation go towards maybe my decentralized Airbnb or my decentralized, what else could I use? Reputation for Kickstarter, for example. That could count towards this stuff. Right now, reputation system is very insular. When you are a great seller on eBay, it doesn't help you much for Airbnb because they're two different accounts on two different platforms. On Ethereum, they'll all be one and the same. You can share a reputation system. So if you can do that, then your reputation has value. And that's a concept that already exists in the physical world, this idea of a village. In Kenya, for example, they have chamas. Chamas are sort of collectives where you have, say, 6 individuals that vouch for a 7th, saying, yeah, this guy is good for it, you can give him a loan and he'll pay you back. Now what happens if it doesn't pay them back? Well, he loses reputation, and reputation is life. They don't have cars or houses to use as collaterals. All they have is their reputation that they're good people and they will indeed pay the loan. And if they don't pay the loan, they breach this trust with their the other participant of the chamas, they're pretty much excluded or banned from the village, so to speak. So it doesn't work on the internet today in developed countries because on the internet nobody knows if you're a dog or a fridge or something like that. And so by bringing reputation back into finance on a global scale, we could have stuff like chamas. I could say Chris over there is good for it, he deserves a loan, and 5-6 people could vouch for Chris. Chris, and actually I might not even need to participate in this. I could just give Chris reputation points because he's transacted with me, and then he can go and get his loan without having to have a physical fiduciary collateral. So I think that's a very interesting use of that technology as well. And then we have DAOs. So DAOs is the little bit of the futuristic stuff. That's good because it's the London Futuristic meetup. So DAOs is an idea that stemmed from a conference by Mike Hearn. I think it was the Turing Festival in Vienna mid last year, where he was talking about this Google self-driving cars. So you have Google self-driving cars, they exist, they're a reality. In fact, it's probably more likely we'll have self-driving cars than we'll have clean energy by 2050. So they're coming. And what does 2050 look like, or 2025? So what does that look like? Well, maybe you have an app on your phone where you want to go out. So say Sandra wants to go out tonight. She presses a button on her phone. The car arrives. There's no driver, obviously. She comes out, gets into the car. The car speaks cryptocurrency. The highway speaks cryptocurrency. Her phone speaks cryptocurrency. So she can pay for that car straight from her phone using an app that maybe looks like, I don't know, Uber or Halo. Say it might look like this. So she arrives, she pays for it, the highway talks to the car and say, hey, you know, this is peak time, if you want to go on the fast lane, you need to pay a little bit more. She says yes. Right, that's pretty standard fare, and that's coming for sure. What's interesting here is more the question as to who owns the car. Is it Google? Is it the Hello type app? Is it the car manufacturer? And the answer is nobody. The car owns itself. So why would you want to do this? Well, you could have a group of like-minded individuals who decide to pitch in to have this car manufactured, and then distribute the dividends to the people who first started the project, so the shareholders, so to speak, in the crowdfunding model. And the car can drive around, and what's interesting about cars is that they can actually relocate themselves quite easily. They're mobile assets. So cars could, for example, go in more affluent areas to get more money, or maybe where there's more demand, and so on and so forth. But that's a little bit science fiction, because there's practicalities with this stuff. What if the car breaks down? Is there a decentralized automated repair truck that arrives and fixes the car? You know, there's problems like how does it recharge itself? Or maybe you could look for a station, but you know, it's tricky. Where it's really applicable today is in the software world. Or, for example, I could have a service that looks like Dropbox, that constantly listens to the API from Amazon, Rackspace, and so on, cloud providers, and says, wow, this one is cheaper today, so I'll move all my files to this one where it's cheaper. And they can do that very easily and in a very automated way. I mean, it's 10 lines of code. But until then, there was no real way to make this program not centralized in itself, so sitting on a server somewhere. With Ethereum, it's now possible. So you could have a completely decentralized Dropbox with absolutely no human operators, and maybe that contract or that program will get very rich. And that's kind of neat. The machine's getting rich. You could also have a system where DAOs could encourage users to provide information machines are really bad at. So for example, machines are not really good at deciding what's beautiful and what's ugly. So they could ask 1,000 people, is this ugly, is this picture ugly, or is this picture beautiful, and reward them with token of values for their effort. It's kind of the rise of a new economy of self-employed people that do those little tasks. Yes, Chris?
What incentivizes people, because the oracles are really interesting, what incentivizes people to tell the truth to the database? Because at the moment we have lots and lots of dirty data. LinkedIn is terrible at working out whether someone's good at their job or not. So how do you solve that problem?
In the context of like the little machine that asks if something's beautiful or not, then you have to assume that knowing that something is beautiful or not is valuable to some other service, right? It doesn't do it just for the sake of knowing something's beautiful. I mean, it could, if somebody was altruistic in nature, could just give away money for this service to exist because it's interesting. But it's more likely that there'll be some other third-party service that will rely on this contract and will say, I really need to know if this is beautiful or not. Somebody wrote the code, here's a little bit of money, and then that money is passed on to the user somewhere. Maybe it takes a commission so you can earn money. Now, how do you know if somebody's telling the truth or not? Well, you have statistical analytics, algorithm that could be built in the contract that eliminates the outliers. You could say that if somebody is constantly going against the majority of people, then he's probably lying or he's answering randomly.
Sometimes that could be the opposite. Sometimes minority reports. I don't want to stick on this issue. I just feel like this has been brought up before and there hasn't been a satisfactory answer. So I was just thinking, as soon as you start introducing economic incentives for people to do data entry, which is all the internet is, it's one big data entry. That's what you're doing all the time. You're filling out forms. And as soon as you start putting economic incentives, you provide an incentive for corruption. Because now you can have a committee of liars where you just fill up rooms of people just entering in fake data, and along comes a minority report who says the truth. The emperor's got no clothes, but no one listens to him.
Right, yeah, absolutely. So if 51% attack that kind of stuff on sharing coins and this type of mechanism, yeah, absolutely, they can collude, and that's the weakness of sharing coins. So a sharing coin, by the way, is when you ask 1,000 people, what is the current temperature in this room, for example, everybody answers something, you take the average, you reward the people who are plus minus 5% of the average, and now you can assess that the temperature is probably 23 Celsius right now, but you didn't use a thermometer for knowing the answer. Now, if this was a mission critical thing, Apple would also want to have maybe a network of decentralized temperature sensors from 3 different manufacturers in this room, pushing data, and we can compare with those values. So for anything mission critical, I'd say definitely you want to have a basket of data feed, not just the one which you're absolutely right, could have been coded against by people pulling together in order to affect the value of the sharing. So that's how you would do it. Okay, so let's look at something a little bit more practical now. What does it look like? So this is Mist, is the Ethereum browser. For those who are already familiar with Ethereum, you're thinking, wow, it looks different from last time. Yes, we've changed things a little bit. So Mist is an app. It can be in browser, it can be an executable, a DMG file, an exe file, whatever, that you run, and it understands the Ethereum protocol. And all those little apps here, so I have my people app, my property app, a joint account, a crowdfunding app, and a drone insurance. So I have 5 apps. Actually, I think I have a little more than that. There you go. I have a little rumor mill as well, which is like a prediction market. Those apps are living on the Ethereum network, so it's well understood that the contracts, the programs are on the blockchain. That's decentralized. What about the front ends? The front ends are also decentralized. So the front ends are HTML or QML files that are zipped up together, and they live on a BitTorrent-like network. And they're incentivized to exist because people want to download those programs and are willing to pay for it, or the programmers are willing to pay someone else to host their stuff. It works exactly like the BitTorrent network, but incentivized. So these applications the front ends aren't living on the blockchain. That's an important distinction. It's going back to that questions about scalability. How do you put all this stuff on a single blockchain where everybody shares? You don't, is the short answer. So peer-to-peer communication, stuff like, for example, negotiating with another individual, that doesn't require consensus because it's purely a negotiation process. We haven't had an agreement yet. That goes on Whisper, which is our peer-to-peer protocol. Stuff like large files, video, media, text, even large quantities of text, that goes on Swarm, which is our BitTorrent-like protocol. And the dApps front end, that also goes on Swarm. Why? Because it's a big file. You're not putting that on the blockchain. Let's go back actually to the top of that page. There you go. So what's interesting here is that the browser is able to understand what those contracts are doing, because the contract developers can specify that for this dashboard where they're going to be displayed, they should use certain data types. So in this case, we have a map data type, we have a graph data type, and then we have a numbers data type. For the programmers in the audience, it's completely reactive programming, so there's no need to constantly listen for the data having changed. That comes free, so to speak, in Ethereum. If the data changes, those numbers update every 10 seconds on the dot. It's also interesting to note that you can have multiple identities. You're not limited to one. You can create one completely fake identity for doing whatever you want, and then you can have one that you really care about, that holds all your reputation, for example. I mean, I think there's an incentive, certainly would be for me, to aggregate all my reputations from those different services together, so I have an even higher reputation, so maybe I can take that elusive loan eventually. The other thing is you don't need for people to log on those applications. There's no login, create account, there's no need for it. The only person that talks to those contracts can only be the person that says, I am this person. So because they have the private key for that accurate identity. It can't be anyone else. So there's no login, there's no registration. So it's like Uber ID, Open ID on steroids, so to speak. All right, let's scroll down. We're going to zoom in one of those apps. That's the first time I go through these new slides, so should be interesting. So this is my, this is the aggregated wallet that I was talking about earlier. So I'm holding here quite a bit of different types of cryptocurrency, crypto assets. So I have 10% in Ether, which is the internal cryptocurrency for Ethereum. I have some FBTC, BitBTC, BitUSD, and those are basically virtual representations of matching assets, or a virtual representation of the value of Bitcoin, and the same for the dollar. I also have some shilling dollars. Going back to your question, Chris, I can have a shilling dollar as well as a BitUSD, for example. They're not the same thing. They both represent different versions of the USD. Some Litecoin, some Doge Ether, which is a bit of a fun project, mix between Dogecoin and Ethereum. And I have my different accounts. I have some pocket money, some swear jars, some college funds, and I can only take from these accounts based on certain practicalities. So maybe the swear jars, I oversee like one would, I put money in, and then I don't really care what I do with that money. It's like beer money. But my college fund, maybe I've made sure that those funds couldn't be taken out of this account for at least maybe 5 years or until they mature or something like that.
So Stephan, today you've got this kind of dashboard yourself. Do you expect that in 2 years' time we'll all have these kind of dashboards as what's part of our core application suite on our laptops and PCs?
It's hard to predict the future. I mean,
people are looking at this and they're wondering, wow, this seems a bit interesting, it seems a bit complicated. Do I need to get my head around this, or is this all going to go away? And so are we all going to be living like this shortly?
For me, I think people are more and more aware of issues with privacy and control over your own life and your funds. I think people see the value fairly immediately if they ever try to build a business, say in France, and they go through all this red tape, and they see the value in having a decentralized network to operate their business. I think the people in the developing world also see the value of this very much, because that allows the unbanked to actually bank, and not just bank, but also participate in the global economy, not limited to just spending money in a store, but also participating in building startups. I think that's tremendous value. So my view is yes, absolutely. I think this will pick up. Now, in terms of, if you're talking specifically in terms of the adoption of the software platform, that's a completely different different ball game, so to speak.
So you don't need to be a developer to have this?
No, that's just a download. But that in itself is interesting. So the friction, which is introduced by having to download a third-party app, we're fully aware of it. So that's why we're working on an in-browser implementation. So you can have your Chrome browser, your Safari browser, go to a website, and it will display this in-browser through a module, through a plugin, so to speak. It won't be Flash, don't worry. It's probably something like ASM.js or Knuckle or something like that. And it'll be very easy for people to use. And also remember that the blockchain itself you can connect to without having to use this stuff. I mean, a web provider today could create an application that's semi-centralized. A typical example is gambling sites, where they have this proverbially fair concept to prove that they actually didn't cheat the random number generator for their lottery, for example. So they post that information on the blockchain, they post something that can then subsequently analyze once the result is in and prove categorically that they didn't cheat, that it was really a random number. So that's a good usage of it, and I think we'll see a progressive adoption of this type of stuff. People saying, oh, you don't trust us, we realize this, here's why you can trust us, we're putting this information on the chain, and then progressively people will start to realize, well, we're still trusting your website, what if there was a man in the middle? Because there'll be more and more security attacks of this kind. And I'll say we need to decentralize the whole lot. And this is, I think, when this comes in.
Is this a good point in the presentation just to pause for a few questions or comments from the audience, or would you like to continue with
I think I'll finish up. I mean, it's not that much.
You've just got a few more slides, yeah?
Yeah.
I just want to be sure that people have a chance to interact, because I can see I can see various bubbles on top of people's heads. What is this really?
It's like The Sims. So, okay. That's my, it's a wallet. I mean, obviously it's a wallet, so I can decide where I spend my stuff, and I have sort of like my online banking, but this is completely under my control. This is completely under my control. Nobody else has access to this. I'm not requesting permission to have this information. It's my information. So where do I find those apps? I find them in an app catalog. It looks just like an app store. In this case, there would be a page which would be assembled probably by your organization to have sort of the best of dApps, so people know where to go, because there's a big discovery mechanism here. So I have a family trust here, double ownership of funds and assets, and automatic inheritance in case of emergency. Define emergency, I suppose. Escrow, that's a useful one. I mean, anybody who bought stuff on eBay knows that escrow is expensive and tricky. And then I have new societies. I can create a tradable company. I can maybe participate into a new voting mechanism for my community, for my organization, for my football club, whatever. And Futurarchy, which is a type of decision-making mechanism based on prediction markets. A developer marketplace. I mean, all sorts of things. Natural event insurance, that's a very good fit for Ethereum. A rumor mill, which is a prediction market, and so on. So let's go and have a look at this one. It's a crowdfunding application, hooray. So here we have an option to create a mesh network over North Korea, or open source Google's AI chatbot. So it all sounds great. Oh, but wait, there was this little icon here blinking, and you're going to click on it. And it says, oh, be careful here. This contract, so the underlying contract that powers this dApp has refused or declined to provide the source code for it. Right? And that's a little bit unfair, because it's very easy for them to do so, they just chose not to. So it's still possible for developers to go and decompile the code for that contract, identify it on our chain, decompile it, and say, yeah, it does what it says it does. But there's no incentive for them to do so, unless you could have a decentralized network of code auditors, which is exactly what happened in this better version of the contract. where actually other people that I know and that I trust have also trusted this contract. It has made its source code available for review, and auditors have reviewed it in exchange for a fee, saying yes, it's good. And these auditors themselves have reputation systems, so you know, it goes on, right? It's very meta. So what does this do? Well, I can here build a lighthouse contract, so commonly used for the building of public goods. Well, I have a question about this, so I can type my text. Just choose identity. So maybe I want to use my any of those identity. There you go. I'll use the bike shop. Bike shop will go and invest. Are you sure you want to send the message? Yes. So this, remember, you're in control. So you choose pretty much every single interaction. You have a choice to decide if you want to go ahead or not. Here we ask for $100. That's a little bit much. I'll put 25. And it says, all right, so the bike shop sends money to the crowdfunding project. Okay, well, I need to find where my funds are coming from. Let's go and use any of those accounts. And there you go, so I'll use my Stephan account. And I'll send it. And I participated in this app. So it has other usage. So this one is a little bit more complex. It's that, it's that family trust. It's a joint account, right? It's just like any joint account that you may have today at the bank, except it's under your full control. So in order to create a joint account, this one has an interesting property. If something happens to us, Hair will have access to the funds at a certain date. So let's try this. So first of all, I'm going to add my partner, Jane Webb. And Jane is actually married to a robot. Nobody knows you're a robot on Ethereum. So they're having a kid. So we'll pick a profile. But you see, the thing is, he's not born yet, and he's young, or he's young. So I want this kid to have access to it at a later date. I don't want that kid to grow up to be 16, spend all the money on booze and cigarettes. So I'll say it's only available after a certain date. So I'll invite this person and I'll ask a question that only them remember. So what's the name of your favorite plush toy, for example? And that will form a bit of a key. Now you don't have to use this question answer format. You can use passphrases and so on, but this is sort of a fun example that we've put in there. So his favorite toy is Zibili. And so now it's going to create this identity. And now I can save it to disk and put it in maybe a bank vault or something, or maybe I put it in a very safe place, or I send it by email, and we can do things like multi-sig, so that 2 out of 3 would be required in order for him to use the funds. But in this particular case, we'll use something pretty straightforward, and we'll say he can only use these funds starting from January 19, 2038. It's all code under the hood, so if I'm a coder, or if I know coders, I can go and review the contract. That's actually actual code, Ethereum code. And I can check that everything's fine. I can make modifications to it, but if I don't want to, I don't have to. And then I choose a fee for publishing this contract to the network, right? Because in order for those contracts to live on the Ethereum network, you need to have all those people that maintain the network, all those people that participate in the consensus that's taking place, saying yes, it's true, no, it's false, that kind of stuff. So they need to be rewarded. So in order to reward them, every time you make a transaction in Ethereum, you need to do a little micro transaction when you change the state of the network. And in this case, I think that, say, 0.5 Ether, which is about $0.30, 30 cents of a dollar, will be sufficient. Now, at that price, it will take 24 seconds for the network to come into consensus with that contract baked in. So 24 seconds, that sounds, this is a joint account, 24 seconds, fine. I waited a lot longer, actually. We'll go for that. So again, I confirm, publishes it. No reference to the Sims here. Then it's done. So now I have a joint account, and I can do various things. So, for example, here I thought it would be a very good idea to buy 2,500 black coins at market price, but unfortunately, Jane, my wife, decided not to. Or in another case, we bought an Uber unlimited subscription. Maybe it's a decentralized Uber. It's been approved by both of us, and now we have access to that subscription. So that's about it. I'll finish up on a few notes and then we'll take questions, David. So the story so far, we started in November 2013. We have 87 meetups. Well spotted, David. So the community is a very key part of what we do. Without those applications on the network, Ethereum is pretty much an empty shell, or more like maybe an Xbox without any launch title. And that really would suck. So we're trying to really encourage people to build those applications, and that's pretty much my role. So we organize hackathons and workshops. There's one tomorrow in London at Mile End, and we're going to try to have as many hackathons as we have meetups, if not more, and also a global hackathon to go and reward, say, the best of breed dApp for the month or something like that. If you're a developer and you're interested in the stuff, the core clients are in C++, Go, Python. We also have community implementations in Java, Haskell, Clojure. We have also stuff in Objective-C, Android Java version, whatever it's called. So we have quite a lot out there if you're interested in participating in building the network. But in order to build the contracts, remember, you don't have to be a hardcore developer. What you don't need is sufficient. So I'll finish with this. For me, Ethereum is about finding out what happens when applications are modular. So you have a decentralized eBay, you're not going to have a monolithic contract that just does eBay. You're going to have an auction engine, you're going to have a reputation system, you're going to have a delivery tracking mechanism, and they're all going to interact, and maybe they're going to interact with other type of service. What happens in that case? I mean, it hasn't happened yet, I'm curious. What if anybody could bootstrap a business, issue shares? Again, the end bank, what if they could have access to credit? What if anybody could trade derivatives anywhere, anytime? What if computer programs could employ humans? What if the Internet of Things could self-heal? That's the project from IBM. And what if the Internet finally became secure again? And that's pretty much the goal of Ethereum. So we're about to find out. And thank you.
Let's have some questions. So, Chris?
Oh, a surprise, Chris.
Thank you.
I'm good.
Very much. That was really, really cool. Do you feel like you're taking on too much and you're being overly prescriptive rather than focused on one area really, really well? Like, take HTTP, for example. It wasn't this kind of grand, vision or anything like that. It was just a very piecemeal request for comments, get feedback on the core protocol. But what you're showing us is an awful lot. You're describing and you're telling us what to do with the tool rather than letting the users tell you how they would like to use this tool.
Okay, so there's two questions in one here. So what's the level of community participation, first of all? Wow, it's open source on GitHub, and a vast majority of our team is actually people who were contributing to the project in the early days. In fact, 99% of them are. So it's a community project. Now, we also have, it says here, RSC channels and so on, where we talk to people. We have GitHub issue tracker. People can contribute code. We regularly accept pull requests on our GitHub. So I think it's pretty open in that regard. The Mist browser, the news shots from Alex van der Sande, they were presented on a Google Air Hangout, I think, 4 days ago, and obviously we invite people to go and say, oh, actually that's rubbish, or it's too, it's fantastic, whichever, So basically contribute and help out. So any help we can get, definitely. And you're right. I mean, there is a danger of being too prescriptive with the UX in particular. So if every dApp needs to have a little hexagonal button so everything looks consistent, that could be seen as an issue. But it's not, because really we're not forcing anyone. It's just a style guide, and we'll say, right, that's the style guide. You want to do consistent? You can. You don't want to do consistent? Knock yourself out. Doesn't really matter. And then there's the second question, is taking on too much. So I remember, like in January, when I first read about Ethereum on Christmas Day, actually, I thought, wow, that's going to change the world, and that's already a big mission, right? But I wasn't too sure why. I knew this consensus at scale with the Turing-complete blockchain was a big deal. And then when we started to realize that you could have DAOs, completely autonomous corporations with no human master that employ human, then at that point, you're getting straight into futuristic science fiction. So if you're going to be ambitious, might as well be fully ambitious. In terms of the software platform itself, I don't think we're being overly ambitious based on the progress we've made so far. So all the clients are running pretty smoothly right now. Mist is pretty smoothly, guys. Not completely smoothly. But yeah, if you think about what's left to be done, right? So we need to make Mist as it stands today on Go look like this. So it's graphic, UX, UI, engaging with the community to understand, you know, the patterns that they'll need to have access to in order to build those apps. But the core EVM code and the blockchains are working. There's also going to be a lot of work in education and so on. For Whisper, Whisper is actually now live, which is the peer-to-peer protocol. And Swarm, we're probably going to partner or use open source projects to use this. So if you think about it, Whisper in itself is kind of like telehash, and Swarm is like BitTorrent. So since there are other projects out there, including BitSwarm, including IPFS, that are working on this incentivization of decentralized file storage, where we can work with them to finish that up early. But we will be delivering on time Q1 2015.
Steve?
Thank you. Great presentation. You mentioned $18 million was raised. What was the investment case to the investors?
It's not an investment. So that's the Ether cell was, so first we need to understand what Ether is. So Ether is this fuel that powers the contract. And it actually goes a lot further than just what you saw on the screen here. So there's an underlying mechanism where the contracts, are you familiar with the halting problem? The halting problem?
No.
So basically you take any piece of code today in any language, and nobody will ever be able to prove that this code is not going to run into an infinite loop. It doesn't matter if it's 2 lines of code. There's no way to prove it because compilers are doing their thing in the background and potentially will create an infinite loop due to some weird bug. Right? So we can't have an infinite loop on Ethereum for obvious reasons. If we had an infinite loop on Ethereum, all machines would be pretty much 100% CPU time, every participant on the network, and the network would stop working. Ethereum would be dead in the water until we fix this bug. So we can't even take that chance. I mean, I know there's some projects out there that claim to have solved part of the halting problems, including, you know, what is the work done with V8 from Chrome with JavaScript, but that's not good enough. To say you're 99.9% sure you solved it isn't 100%. So the only way to solve this is to introduce this concept of a fuel. The idea that every time you do an execution cycle, or a contract does an execution cycle on the network, it needs to pay for its own consumption of energy or of CPU power. So in our case, we said that we use the word gas. So the user that contact, this is okay done transparently, so an end user wouldn't need to really know this, but the programmers probably would. Contract that's being called by a user will receive a certain amount of Ether, right? And that's converted into gas. And then the gas is consumed as the contract is going through the execution cycle, each line of code, and that costs 1 gas, say. But then if it starts doing stuff that's expensive, like storing data on the network, which will be shared by everyone who holds the full blockchain, and that needs to be more expensive. So that's 200 gas. And the reason why gas isn't the same as Ether is that if the price of Ether goes up and down, we wanted to isolate the price of gas so the network could continue running smoothly. So you could just devalue or overvalue the price of gas depending on the value of Ether and maintain a stable economy. So that's what Ether is. And then what we've then do to raise those funds in order to build Ethereum and have because we have quite a large team now, about 25 going on to probably 35 when it's all said and done. We said, well, we're going to sell this Ether in a pre-sale. And so people bought Ether. Why would they buy Ether? Well, they could want to buy Ether because, for example, they want to have an insurance service. So you're going to need large quantities of Ether to back their insurance contracts to prove that they hold what they say they do, or else, you know, they could just, they'll be broke like day one of the first claim, so to speak. So that's one reason. Also, users of those dApps that want to be heavy users might want to have Ether in the first place to go and access the dApps, because every time you change the state of a dApp, you need to pay gas.
I suspect there must be a business case in there somewhere.
Yeah.
I didn't quite hear a business case.
Yeah, there's a forward contract on Ether. But with regard to the blockchain itself, within the context of you targeting the Internet of Things, is this going to grow exponentially, or are you just going to kind of focus on a growing section of the blockchain? You're not going to trace back to the beginning?
Well, no, I mean, there's two things. There's the existence of the blockchain itself, which has well, from a scalability perspective, needs Whisper and Swarm, in my view, to be competitive. I mean, I think that's a clean way of approaching it. And then there's also the light clients, which only need to have a basic version of that chain, which is very small, that then can link to other sections or even other chains potentially, depending on what proof of what consensus algorithm we use. So currently we use proof of work, which would be for those who know what proof of work is, it's the algorithm by which people prove that they've done the work that they said they did, and it's proof of work, which allows for this decentralized consensus. Right now we use one that limits the possibility or almost prevents the possibility for centralization of mining. Like you've seen today, with Bitcoin, where they have giant mining farms somewhere in Iceland. On Ethereum, we try to make sure that we're going back to one CPU, one vote type model. So we're planning to use this Hashimoto algorithm. That's the one we're currently settled for, which would seriously prevent ASICs from existing because they'll be overly expensive to be built, which allows also the decentralization of the mining algorithm.
Mark?
How do you prove identity in a commonly used device like your laptop, for example? When you've got your browser, you can send money wherever. How do you prove your identity in that case?
So you don't have to, first of all. But some services might require you to. So
I didn't. So if I stole your laptop, then
it's not very nice.
Then I can pretend I'm you. Yeah, I know.
So
if he stole you.
Trying to get worried about my laptop. So that's a very good point. So we're fully conscious that if today you lose your Bitcoin private key, right, and say you had a single private key with all your funds on it, which is a little bit silly thing to do, but say you did, you only lose your money, and that's sad, but it's money. If you were to lose this, you lose your entire digital identity, especially if you're quite attached to your reputation system. So out of the gate, we'll implement multisig so that when you create an account, which is not an account, which is an identity, which could be a pseudonymous or anonymous identity, you'll be required to have, say, 3 different pieces of information that need to be assembled in order to recreate it, right? So that's like a backup, and at the same time, you could also have some type of challenge response to guarantee that nobody's stealing well, if somebody's stealing your computer, you could encrypt it, you could, just like Bitcoin today, how do you protect your Bitcoin? It's going to be exactly the same.
But arguably, you'd have that on a USB stick in your pocket, and then that's, and it's, if it's, you could put certain funds into the account that the Bitcoin's on, and limit that.
Yeah, exactly. So that was the hair account there, where it's on a USB stick or a piece of paper somewhere.
Yeah.
It goes into a vault, or maybe it's in my documents in case something happens to me, and then it can just be picked up, recreated the identity, which has certain properties.
Close?
Yes. Yeah. I'm interested to kind of create a network, a new model of work, like a whole lot of intelligent freelancers that can swarm together and take on pieces of work and projects and things like that. Kind of like an Odesk or Elance. Is anybody doing anything like that?
No, there's one project that's trying to do a decentralized Kickstarter that has some elements of Elance-like or Elance property, where basically you could start projects to have them kickstarted, and then the people who kickstarted it are the people who also work on it and have certain amount of reputation, but it's not exactly a straight copy of Elance. So yeah, that's good. There you go, build it.
Joe?
When you gave the example of you dying after 3 months and your properties go somewhere else, how does that connect to the ether and gas? Is that just for contract, or your assets can potentially consume themselves and disappear?
How could they consume themselves?
Because you said that every time something is executed, there's a
Oh yeah, but my assets aren't necessarily in ether. My assets could be Bitcoins, or a virtual representation of Bitcoin that I decide to invest in, or shares into this Elance project, because I think it's a good idea. So I've got lots of shares, I die, how are they transferred to my hair? Well, they're being transferred into the contract that holds them from one entity to another, in this case the identity of my hair, who now has access to it, assuming it has matured enough.
But you might say that data also consumes ether and gas?
Yeah, it consumes.
Not only contract.
Yes, but it doesn't consume vast amounts. It consumes minute amounts in order for the network to continue running. But it doesn't. It can't. Well, actually, it's a very good question. There is a recent development that we've put in the code that might allow you to use those meta assets as source for gas. But we're not too sure if we're going to put that in or not, for various technical reasons, and also for economical reasons, because we haven't really modeled that just yet. So we might be for a V2, but that's kind of a cool thing, where you could have, say, for example, blockchain rent in order to limit bloat of those contracts, you could say they slowly leak gas. And so when they run out of gas, they suicide. That's the name of the opcode that we have. But right now it's not in the code. So right now, if something's on the blockchain, it stays on the blockchain, and there's no rent for it. And it can't use meta asset to pay for its own running cost either at the moment. But that could be a V2.
Question in the back. How do you try to solve the forking problem of network consensus and consolidating the blockchain?
The same way that Bitcoin does through proof of work, although ours is a little bit more advanced. So we have the GOPS protocol, which is a big scary keyword for just rewarding the uncles in the blocks, so that even if you've done only a little bit of work, you still get rewarded for the effort you put in to maintain the network. But it works the exact same way, so it comes into consensus every 10 seconds instead of every 10 minutes, for example. But conceptually, it's the same. Evan?
I think this might have been touched on, but I didn't really understand. So one of the problems with Bitcoin is this expanding blockchain, which means that people are moving to light clients, so you're getting a kind of a new centralization. How are you not getting that?
Well, so first of all, the blockchain scalability issue is an interesting one. So if you look at the number of transactions that Bitcoin can support, which is about 7 transactions per second, assuming a 1 meg block size. So if they wanted to increase that block size, obviously they could have more transactions per second. So that's really the root cause of the problem. They don't want to raise the block size, because if they raise the block size, then it takes even more space on people's hard drive if they hold the full chain. So therefore they use light client, therefore only the miners are mining. And usually these miners are professional miners, so they give centralization and gives way to 51% attack. So that's the problem at stake here. So first of all, we've implemented various technological improvement over and beyond what Bitcoin does to increase the scalability of the platform. So I think right now we're aiming for out of the gate TPS of 600, keeping a very small blockchain size. Then there's Whisper and Swarm to offload as much as possible. And then there's the work we're doing for V2 around hypercubes and things like that Vitalik is working on to also address this. But it is a problem. I mean, if the entire planet was to decide to use Ethereum starting January 21st when it comes out, then yes, it wouldn't work very well. What would happen is transactions would be just holding back until it finds a free block to go in, but it just can't, so the price of gas shoots through the roof, and you can imagine. But it won't happen because the entire planet will not just start using Ethereum on day one. And if we can do 600 TPS when Bitcoin can do 7, and Bitcoin is only using 1/7 of its current capacity, because that's exactly what they're on, then that means we could have 100 times, or actually 100 times, 700 times more people than the entire Bitcoin network currently supports before we start running into problems at the gate. Which is, I mean, I'd love for that to happen. Everybody decides everything should be decentralized. I don't think it's going to happen. I think we'll have a progressive growth, and by year 1, we'll be in a much better place to improve and iterate over the scalability issue even further.
Question here? Yeah, hello. So I'm interested in the motivation of the different players involved here. And so far, I think I've counted 5 different kinds of stakeholders. So there's the people who put in the $1.8 billion. There's the people in the organisation that are building it, Ethereum. There's all of the open source programmers who are helping you build it for free. And then there's application developers on top of that. But could you list any other stakeholders and then tell me what revenue streams they expect to be getting out of this?
Yeah, that goes back to sort of my famous 4th slide with that guy with the door. So why would somebody build a decentralized service if they can't have any expectation of revenue? Because it's decentralized, because they can't take a commission, because in theory, anyone could go and copy the code, which is completely open source by default, and there's no way to have encryption in the chain just yet until homomorphic encryption becomes a thing. So why would they do that? So I think that's a flawed argument. I had that discussions many times with many people. I think network effects in a decentralized app will still be very strong. I think people are attached to the apps that they use, that they open every day, and I think that dashboard will be sort of anchoring them to certain apps that they really like to use. So I don't think they're going to go to a different app just because the backend code of that app is identical but with a lesser commission. Obviously, if the commission is too high, then I think they'll move. but the market will find its balance, so to speak. It's a completely open free market. It's the same reason why, why is everybody on Facebook when there's like a million alternatives that are 10 times better? Facebook is free, so they're not even paying for it. Why are they leaving? Well, because you can't. It's not because you can't do cheaper than free. It's because network effects. Because your family is there. Because your friends are there. And I think we'll see the same for dApps. I think there's still there's a genuine business case around this idea of creating decentralized app with much lower commission than exists today. Maybe even flat fee rather than commissions, and provide a useful service and earn money.
So you're not worried about a race to the bottom. You're not worried that there'll be some other services come along and say, you're currently using this, don't you realise if you want to swap over here, and I'll do it for you for free, then it would cost you less money. A bit like these insurance services, you're using Admiral insurance, you should swap over to somebody else. You're not worried that all the revenue is going to disappear from this?
No, I used to be worried about that back in January when I first discovered it.
Back in January, that was a long time ago.
Yeah. But not anymore. No, I really believe talking to the applications developer I'm in touch with, I don't think that's going to be a problem. When there's really strong technological roadblocks that could limit revenue streams, such as homomorphic encryption not being a thing just yet, then there's semi-centralized ways to approach the problem. So you could have a daemon on a server that does the encryption and then provides, sort of monitors the blockchain for transactions that gives them access to, say, a file that's been encrypted on that centralized server, then distribute the file to the user. It's not fully decentralized, and it's semi-decentralized, but it's still head and shoulders above what you can use where everything's centralized.
Oksana?
Could I just interject?
No,
I just thought the chat meant as a stakeholder, some of the state actors, like for example, GCHQ.
Oh, no, I don't know. Is that...
Yes, they're interested as well.
So in terms of network disruption and the sort of sabotage.
You mean, are we worried that we're being sabotaged?
That eventually, if it was very successful, the effort to do so, to disrupt it, or to have the capability to do so, would be kind of inherent.
Yeah, we thought about that too. But so far, nothing.
It's a good line of discussion. Let's get back to that show. Oksana?
Right. My question is slightly different. I'm sitting here reflecting that I maybe understood 25 to 50% of what you said.
Yes.
I
think you're in good company, Oksana.
Is Visual Basic at the age of 16. So my question really is, if this is to change the world, what I see happening with this, you're really asking, if I understand correctly, for people to start using a lot of time to do a lot of dealing in a decentralized way. Whereas I think it goes counters the trend that is happening out there, the social trend towards specialization. So the nurses, I don't know, the teachers, people like me, they won't be doing the coding bit that you're talking about. What will happen, people like you maybe are able to check the code as you were suggesting, and maybe they're able to do this decentralized thing. But what will happen eventually, people like me will do the usual thing people do, and they trust big guys behind you, so I think you will be bought by someone big, and it will end up in a centralized thing from where we started.
So there's two things here. So the first one is it doesn't matter what happens to us. So to this gentleman's point, if we get grown tomorrow, it makes no difference. The software is out there, it's open source. If we get bought, it makes no difference, because if we were to change the software so that somehow we take a commission every time something happens on the network, people will say, what the hell are you doing? And they'll fork our code and make it free again, and they'll win. And that's good. So you don't have to. Nobody can. But nobody. It doesn't matter. Say we get. What would they buy? We're a not-for-profit organization. There's nothing to buy.
Well, maybe get your code building for free. You're ready to give it away. But ultimately, maybe that's a new way of reaching out to a consumer customer who is able to do this coding.
Okay, that's two different things. We're not producing the apps. We're producing actually exactly the high number of 0 apps. The apps are built by the community, by third parties, not us. We're just providing the protocol and the programming languages. So you're right about this first point, which is nobody who's non-technical is gonna go and crack open the code and type code in. So this example of the that we had on screen with a joint account where the code appears, that could be an optional step. What matters is that the person had a drop down where they said, this is my wife, this is me, this is my kid, I want it to become available by date X, and then at no point did they need to interact with code. The code was just there because it can be created, it can be a contract, a native contract on the blockchain, but it could also be provided by people who provide a service. So just like a mobile app, where you say, I want a joint account, this is me, this is my wife, and no code ever appears, just said yes, and it creates it for a fee, for example.
That's not a question of code, it's a question of trust. If I don't understand what you just said, why should I trust you?
You don't have to trust me.
You don't have to trust me.
But.
You don't have
Come on.
I said you don't have to. I said you don't have to trust me, it's trust us.
If there are big guys behind you,
It's like Bitcoin, you know, like you have to trust.
So is the portal,
trust math.
So do I have to use your portal, or can someone just imitate the portal?
You can use any. It doesn't matter. It's not going to be baked in.
So I have a question for the audience at this stage. Who here is thinking this is just a kind of naive, you know, this is never going to change the world, this is just some bunch of people who know how to spell QML and JSON and so on? Anybody who would oppose this whole proposal that this is going to have a radical implications?
Can we have a gentler description of the same? Then yes.
implications, but not of the kind that I'm afraid you're expecting. It will raise the game, but the game will still be run on the same social rules.
So there are bigger social forces that this won't be able to overturn. It's a bit like open source. Open source was ended up being bought by IBM, you know, and then IBM is the biggest contributor towards Linux.
I see this as a kind of the WAP to the future 3G.
Yes.
You know,
WAP to the
WAP to the future 3G.
WAP, WAP. Oh, WAP. Right. Yeah, I remember.
Because there's a lot of other things that need to be interleaved into it yet, which haven't been accommodated. Trust being one of them, probity, the ability of this to kind of like interleave into the wider kind of legal social system so that people feel.
So the counter argument may simply be, we're going to take a few times to get used to this. You know, we've heard it once, and the first time you only take in maybe 5 or 10%. I mean, the second time you'll understand another 5 or 10%, because it is a different way of looking at it. And it's like we ended up in China. You know, we're not going to make much sense of what people are talking about, but eventually we're going to get it, and we're going to turn around and say, oh my goodness. So is that how you would justify it?
That's more like I mean, I suppose, you know, we have, as a foundation, we have a mission. That's a pretty simple one. We're going to build this stuff. I mean, from a personal perspective, I think it's really interesting for me to be part of it, because it's the first time that you see this this concept of decentralization is really has the means, the financial and resource and brains means to actually go into the mainstream. So when Ethereum is in a major newspaper, that's the first time that you actually have a really strong decentralized project that's being brought forward to the general public and can change minds slowly but surely. I think that's interesting. If you look at other projects like Hyperborea, CJDNS, they're all excellent projects technically, but nobody's ever heard of them. Nobody probably will ever heard of them because they just don't have the traction. I think Ethereum is the first time when people are saying, yeah, I can see where this is, I can see where this is going, and I can see those apps. And I know you think that you need to know code, but you, as I said, you really don't. Some of those apps, unfortunately, I don't have all of them on my computer, but they're just like video games. I don't need to be a programmer to play Angry Birds, right? So they're just decentralized. And the real question, I think, for me is, will people care enough about their privacy, about security, to actually want to adopt something else? But maybe they don't have to. Maybe the service in itself is good enough that they can be presented as standalone applications. They just happen to use Ethereum, and people don't even know that it's running Ethereum. I think that's a better way to think about it. Like Facebook. When I go on Facebook, I want to watch pictures of funny cats. I don't care if it's running PHP, HTTP, if it's a TCP/IP under. Yeah, I don't care. I just want to watch the funny cat. And I think it'll be the same thing for Ethereum.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that one of the things like you just mentioned, the network is the power of this. So you're susceptible to what network you actually create. So if this network is populated by, I don't know, like a black market, you know, people doing, you know, then you'll have one kind of situation. If this network is purchased by Facebook, you would have another problem. You know, but my question is actually different. You were saying that the halting problem is solved, say, on a code level, but I can see this tool being quite open to creating kind of self-generating pyramidal kind of structures in terms of the human aspect of it. You know, get an extra person on board and reward. You know, so they defer. You know, like the classic thing where you used to say, you know, someone would say, "Give me a bit of money," and so, I'll send chain letters and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. I think those kind of mechanisms would work perfectly in this platform.
They would. A lot of things would work perfectly.
But what I'm just saying is, so you have any ideas of how to safeguard these sort of things that would end up being processes you couldn't stop?
No, because, well, I mean, okay. So I see what your question is. What if the services that provide little value but are sort of energy consuming have more of an impact than the ones that actually do provide good? No, they can't run away because every time they change the state of the blockchain, they pay, so they'll have to be very rich.
I see, so the cost would stop it.
The cost would
stop. It would still be like basically a classic privilege scheme where put money and you'll get back money later on from someone, which is very easy to implement in this. To me, that's just generally kind of not legal for good reason. But here would just be great. It would work.
It'll be run by computers that can't be stopped.
Yeah, and so then I could see that destroying yourself just because it gives you bad reputation.
Okay, so this and then that was the beginning of your question, which I think was a very good one. So how do we avoid that? Basically, the first thing that comes up on this is Silk Road 10.1 or whatever, because they'll probably be at 10 already. They're getting shut down now, and then it can't be stopped anymore. I personally, I'm very comfortable with that. I think it's if you look at what the internet brought to the world, when the first time people looked at the internet, they're like, oh my god, this is going to be heaven for pedophiles. Plus now we have PGP encryption, so imagine that. We're screwed. The whole world is going to be a mess. Actually, this dark stuff is 0.001% of what actually takes place on the internet on a daily basis in terms of the benefits that it brings to us. So the good definitely outweigh the bad by a factor of 10 zillion, I think. But you have a point, which is that if the first thing that comes up on this platform are negative things, then they will be understood as a negative thing. And again, that's why I think we're uniquely placed to avoid that, because Bitcoin started off a bit like that. It was a technical project. When journalists had questions, they didn't really know who to call, so they just look at the applications. It was mostly negative, dark stuff. In our case, they pick up the phone, they talk to me, and then we can talk about the other apps. And so it actually does help driving the dialogue by putting them in touch with the startups that use our platform, and you're like, oh right, okay, yeah, that's a legit business. That's actually genuinely interesting.
So we're going to run out of time soon. I'm going to take a few quick questions. You have a question here?
Yeah, decentralized automation sounds great in theory, but it's a motivation that concerns me for would you call it a DAO. For example, you gave an example of a driverless car, a robot that owns itself. It's motivated by making money, becoming rich, it drives to an affluent area. How does that benefit anybody?
Oh yes, yes, I've heard that one before. Yes. So the question, by the way, is if what drives those DAOs is purely monetary gain, how does that help the planet? And I think, well, clearly in this case, because it's a simple example, it helps the economy, I would say. But more importantly, I think what you're missing is that anyone can use this stuff. Anyone can create computing service. Anyone at all. There is no barrier, none whatsoever. There's no regulation. There's nothing. So anyone, anywhere can build a business, and that's completely autonomous.
Anyone being human, but we're talking about a robot there.
The robots can create themselves on a network, though. So it's not like they can use a biological algorithm and sort of copy themselves until they find a random variation that's more efficient than the other one. It'll be far too expensive. So, and it's also a non-deterministic model, so there is no number generation, or random number generation. It's a deterministic model, so there is no random number generation either. So this sort of runaway AI, or things like Daniel Suarez Demon, or more to your point, what's the name? George Strauss Accelerando. I don't believe that's going to happen.
Andrea?
Just a practical, let's say Airbnb is middleman, they make money, but they provide service.
Yes. They provide a website.
Well, they provide also insurance, they provide, and and also they try to improve. Now you can say they're taking too much money out of it, but so if you have somebody, how do you motivate the improvement of a service? So how do the people pay for an improvement of service of the platform, let's say? So if somebody develops a platform, But
they could crowdfund it.
Sorry?
They could crowdfund it. They could say, right, I really like this decentralized Airbnb, but it's missing this new service. I don't know what it could be, to be honest. My brain draws blanks on what it could be, but say there was something else that could be done on top of that platform. They could say, well, we'll send you, I don't know, £5 each, say 10,000 people do that, in order to build this feature, and then in exchange you issue shares to us, the decentralized Airbnb shares back to us. So you could crowdfund improvements to those decentralized applications.
Vladislav?
Is there some way, if the community finds some application that they really don't want to have them there, is there some way to take down some applications?
No, that's the beauty of it. It's not possible, and I find that very interesting, because then people just have to accept that it forces them to think about having multiple types of reputation systems. So not just having the one reputation system that bans all the bad stuff because it's controlled by a couple of individuals who think certain things should be banned or not. You could have a myriad of different reputation systems that work with each other to reflect your value better. So maybe you have certain political views, certain religious views, you could subscribe to a set of reputation system, and then you could only be displayed on the App Store, say, the apps that conform to this stuff. And I find that quite interesting. Actually, that was one of the drop-down on my Alex, to put in there, you select your reputation system or set of reputation systems. Because I don't think there's one reputation system for everything. I think that's wrong to say there's only one way to do things. Like take reputation for, say, Obama in the United States. If you ask the Tea Party, the reputation is pretty down to 0. If you ask Democrats, it's pretty way up there, around 100. So,
no.
Well, 90. Okay, take the Obama fans then. Reputation would be 100.
No.
We're almost out of time. There's a few people who've got their hands up who haven't asked a question yet, so we'll have to be very quick, because then I think we need to let our brains slow down a bit. But Baz?
I just want to know, for the ones that want to know more about technical aspects of
technical.
I thought you were covering that today, but we didn't go much in detail. I covered very well in the first part. We started talking about blockchain, and then
I can show you on my laptop. Are we going to the pub or something?
We're going to go to the pub shortly, but there's a whole workshop tomorrow, isn't there?
There's a workshop tomorrow, and it's every 3 weeks.
Right.
And we're doing it's in Milan, at the Barclays Accelerator. So you can come over, bring a laptop, and we install the stuff.
And there's lots of hatch spaces, yeah?
I think it's giving us the space well. Is that every 3 weeks?
Every 3 weeks you do one?
It's every 3 weeks, yeah.
Yeah.
On
it's an all meeting. You can't done this in 20 minutes, can you? It takes the whole day?
Yeah, it's the whole day. But you don't have to stay the whole day. If you're bored, you can go do something else.
You had a question here?
You said it was fully anonymous, so the feature of Bitcoin where you can trace chains of payments.
You still have that.
You do have that.
But there's ways
someone
around
has my private key, they can see
build a coin mixer like Dark Wallet in 500 lines of a contract. You could use zero knowledge proof to completely hide or stealth coin, that kind of stuff. You can do that in a contract. So these are applications of the protocol, they're not properties of the protocol. The protocol is very much pseudonymous, just like this guy.
So earlier I asked who was skeptical about this. I guess I should also ask the question, who now wishes they had known about this 9 months ago and they got involved in Ethereum earlier? 1 or 2. It's not too late. It's not too late.
I counted 8. I counted 8.
You counted 8, yes? So there's many, many more things to say. I mean, there's a lot of new ideas here, and there's so many questions which I didn't fully understand the answers to either. I think it's going to take time to become familiar with this set of way of talking. We've got so many of the old concepts deeply wired into our brains. It's going to take us a while to get unused to these concepts and get used to these new concepts. And I think we're going to feature this kind of topic on a regular basis going forwards. Not necessarily from Ethereum, there are other companies that are also addressing this fantastically interesting space, but I'm sure that we're going to hear more about it. So I want to thank Stephen very much for taking the time. Despite the glitches we had with the audio, so I'm sorry about that. We have another meeting in 4 weeks' time. Probably won't be in UCL given the problems we've had today. We'll probably try to get back to Birkbeck. That's a different angle on futurism. In that case, actually, I'm not going to introduce another speaker. In that case, I'll do most of the presentation myself. It will be a report from a conference in Paris, which is known as the Transvision Conference, in which there are lots of people looking at what are the implications of this rapid change in technology for social questions. Are there going to be more inequality as a result or less inequality as a result? Should we be the technology enthusiasts be becoming more socially responsible or socially aware, or will things sort out by themselves? So I'll be giving a summary of my views from that conference in 4 weeks' time from today. There will be more meetings in the new year. We haven't got any of them planned yet. And in the meantime, I encourage you to think about coming along to the pub, which is just a 2 minutes walk away from here, along Torrington Place to the Marlborough Arms, when you'll have a chance to ask the questions that you couldn't think of or didn't have a chance to ask, and also chat to each other and form a new decentralized organizations amongst yourselves.